No academic institution will admit it openly, but the evidence is no longer speculative. Hidden beneath centuries of compartmentalized research, geology, archaeology, genetics, climatology, lies a secret that dissolves the story we've been taught about who we are. Each discipline has stumbled across its own anomalies, oddities too strange to explain, too disruptive to address, and so they are left as footnotes or discarded as errors. But when you align them, layer the geological upheavals over archaeological breaks, place the genetic bottlenecks next to sudden cultural explosions, follow the vanished coastlines and megafaunal extinctions, a rhythm emerges, a pulse. 6 times the Earth has reset. 6 times civilizations have vanished. 6 cataclysms, 6 collapses, and we are the 7th. Before we go further, I invite you to pause for a moment and look around. This story is not fiction. It's not a theory. It's a hidden truth that's been buried beneath the noise of official timelines and textbooks. So, if you're already feeling the gravity of what you're hearing or the unsettling echo of something familiar, subscribe to the channel now. This journey is only just beginning. Let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there right now. It's always astonishing to see how far these hidden patterns reach, and if this story resonates with you, if you begin to grasp the mystery behind the title, we encourage you to share this video. Someone else may need to remember too. This is not myth. It is the simplest explanation. Once you remove the walls between fields of science and the cultural silos that prevent the truth from being seen, it is the story of a planet that does not tolerate permanence. It rises, it collapses, it erases, and it begins again. And humanity has ridden that cycle 6 times before. We are the 7th. The idea is not folklore. It is not speculative fiction. It is the clearest pattern that emerges when artificial boundaries between scientific disciplines are stripped away. Something has happened to humanity again and again, an extinction so thorough it leaves only hints behind. And yet, every time, we return, not as blank slates, not from primitive caves and crude tools, but as survivors, rebuilders, with knowledge that should not be possible for those allegedly emerging from chaos. Why is it that Sumer's writing system appears not gradually but fully formed, as if memory, not innovation, was being transcribed? Why does Egypt's first pyramid, the greatest of all, display engineering precision that even modern architects struggle to replicate, only for every structure that follows to decline in quality? Why is Göbekli Tepe, built before the wheel was supposedly invented, carved with astronomical precision and symbolic meaning? We are told history is a ladder, a slow, steady ascent from stone tools to smart cities. But the evidence tells a different story. The climb is broken violently, repeatedly. Civilizations do not rise and gently fall. They are destroyed in sudden, planet-wide events. The survivors carry forward not tools, but fragments of knowledge, half-remembered truths dressed in myth and ritual. They do not start over at zero. They begin again at a strange intermediate level, as if trying to reconstruct what was lost. It is this unnatural re-emergence of complexity that exposes the lie of linear progress. This is not a developmental pattern. It is the behavioral footprint of survivors rebuilding, and these collapses are not randomly spaced. They align with astonishing precision to a cycle approximately every 12,000 years marked in volcanic ash, ice core disruptions, magnetic field anomalies, and sharp rises in sea levels. The most recent was the Younger Dryas, a global event so sudden and severe it reversed the warming Earth back into ice for over 1,000 years. Firestorms swept continents, oceans surged, ecosystems collapsed, populations vanished, and through the chaos, one constant emerges: memory. Cultures across the globe, from the Maya to the Vedic sages, from the Hopi to the Sumerians, preserved stories of floods, of fire from the sky, of gods who walked with man before the world ended. They did not write these stories as metaphors. They treated them as history. And yet, we ignored them. Modern institutions dismiss such tales as the naive myths of uneducated people, despite the fact that these same stories occur independently across continents and across millennia. The Maya counted world ages. The Hindus recorded cycles of yugas, vast stretches of time ending in destruction. The Hopi described previous worlds consumed by fire and flood, followed by rebirth. The Greeks spoke of successive races of men, each one wiped out and replaced. Different languages, different continents, same pattern, same warning. These were not legends to amuse. They were records designed to endure. The mainstream story of our origin has always been comforting. We are told that humanity emerged as scattered tribes, learned to farm, invented writing, and slowly built cities. Progress is portrayed as an unbroken chain, a triumphant march from savagery to science. But when we peel away this narrative and examine the raw data carbon dates, astronomical alignments, sudden genetic contractions, the chain falls apart. We find dead ends. We find breaks. We find amnesia. Knowledge appears not in a steady curve, but in bursts. Societies emerge with organization, writing, and architecture already in place, as if rediscovered rather than invented, and therein lies the crux of the mystery. If these were isolated anomalies, perhaps they could be dismissed, but they are not. They are global. Sumer, Egypt, India, China, Mesoamerica civilizations all emerging with sudden brilliance and vanishing just as quickly. Their knowledge encoded in structures aligned to stars. Their myths warning of fire and flood. Their gods bringing knowledge from across the sea or sky. If we are to take them seriously, we must admit what they all seem desperate for us to understand. This has happened before, and it will happen again. Mainstream academia cannot accept this, not because the data isn't there, but because accepting it would require demolishing the foundations of everything we believe about ourselves. It would mean that we are not the pinnacle of civilization, but the latest echo, not the first builders, but the last rebuilders. The scientific revolution would be a rediscovery, not a creation. Our technologies, philosophies, even our languages might carry faint traces of an older world, one washed away not just by time, but by forces far greater. The question is not whether other civilizations existed. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is what destroyed them. What force is powerful enough to erase entire worlds, sink coastlines, collapse atmospheres, and yet leave just enough behind for myths to be remembered? To answer that, we must follow the one clue they all seem determined to leave us: a pattern. They encoded it in temples, in monuments, in calendars, and in sky-watching traditions passed from generation to generation. They wanted us to remember the clock, a cycle not measured in years or centuries, but in epochs, and according to that cycle, the time is near. We are not post-catastrophe, we are pre-catastrophe. The indicators are aligning again. Solar cycles are intensifying. The magnetic field is weakening. Climatic instability is accelerating. Earthquakes are rising. Ocean currents are shifting. These are not isolated events. They are signatures of a process far older than civilization itself. The ancients tracked it in the stars. We measure it with satellites, but the conclusion is the same. The cycle is real. It is rhythmic. And it is returning. We are the seventh civilization, not the first, and not the last. But perhaps, if we choose to listen, if we recover what was meant to be preserved, we can be the first to remember what all the others forgot. Across continents and oceans, on mountaintops and beneath deserts, lie monuments so massive, so precise, and so technologically baffling that their very existence threatens the foundations of mainstream history. These are not the crude constructions of tribal societies learning to stack stones. These are masterpieces of engineering, many carved from the hardest rock known to man, fitted together with impossible accuracy. and aligned with celestial events in ways that suggest astronomical understanding far ahead of its time. These stones do not whisper, they shout, and what they tell us is that someone, long before our recorded history began, knew far more than we are willing to admit. Take, for example, the Longyu Caves in China, 24 enormous chambers carved directly into solid siltstone, discovered in the early 1990s by a farmer draining a pond. These underground structures stretch for thousands of square meters, with ceilings that reach heights of over 100 feet. But what truly defies explanation is not their size, but their finish. Every wall, every ceiling, every surface is etched with uniform parallel lines, like the grooves of a massive machine. No soot, no debris, no tool marks from bronze chisels or stone hammers, and no historical record, none at all, describes their construction. Who built them? How? And why would such a monumental project leave not even a whisper in the annals of Chinese history? Travel westward to Baalbek in modern-day Lebanon, and the mystery grows heavier, literally. Embedded within the foundation of a Roman temple are the heaviest known worked stones on Earth. Each megalith weighs more than 800 tons. For comparison, that's more than 5 fully loaded Boeing 747 seconds. The quarry lies half a mile away, across uneven, sloping terrain. Yet the stones were moved, raised, and set into place with such precision that the seams between them are almost imperceptible. Rome built upon these foundations but did not build them. The Romans, engineers of legendary ability, never claimed credit. No records describe how the blocks were transported. No machinery known to antiquity, nor to us, can explain how this was done. Without advanced lifting equipment and energy sources, we are not aware ancient people possessed. In Egypt, beneath the sands of Saqqara, lies the Serapeum, a tunnel complex, housing massive granite boxes each weighing over 70 tons, with lids weighing an additional 15. These boxes are not rough coffins for cattle. As conventional archaeology suggests, their inner surfaces are polished to mirror finishes, their angles are precisely square, and their measurements match tolerances achievable only with modern machining. Copper chisels cannot cut granite. Stone pounders cannot produce such surfaces, even today. Replicating these boxes would require computer-guided diamond-cutting tools, yet these artifacts are said to have been made by a civilization that, according to textbooks, had none of those capabilities. Then there is Pumapunku, in the high Andes of Bolivia, where blocks of andesite and diorite rocks, harder than granite, are carved with such mathematical precision that they interlock like the parts of a machine. These blocks feature perfectly drilled holes, 90-degree angles, and smoothly beveled edges. Some even contain interior channels that suggest fluid or energy movement. Mainstream historians claim the builders had no writing, no wheels, and no metal tools. But modern stonemasons, using power saws and lasers, struggle to recreate the same results. A 2013 experiment by a German team attempting to replicate one of Pumapunku's H-blocks fell short in both accuracy and speed, even with modern technology. So, how did an allegedly primitive culture perform better? The anomalies don't stop there. In Peru, at the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, massive stone blocks, some weighing over 200 tons, are fit together like puzzle pieces in a wall that has withstood centuries of earthquakes. The stones, irregularly shaped, lock together so tightly that not even a razor blade can pass between them. There is no mortar, no gaps, just a silent declaration of engineering mastery. Locals say they did not build the wall, they inherited it. The Spanish, upon encountering it, assumed giants must have built it. And in truth, it feels closer to the work of titans than tribes. Off the coast of Japan, the underwater structure at Yonaguni stretches across the seabed with step-like terraces, flat surfaces, and sharp right angles. Critics claim it is natural, but the symmetry and scale of the formation combined with tool-like incisions and carved channels, suggest otherwise. If built, it must have been constructed when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower, at least 10,000 years ago. That is long before any culture in Asia was supposed to know how to build anything at all, let alone underwater temples. The official silence on this site is not from lack of evidence, but from the disruption it would cause to our model of history. And then there is the Gulf of Cambay, off the coast of India. Here, sonar scans revealed the submerged remnants of what appears to be a vast city complete with roads, grid patterns, and building foundations buried beneath 100 feet of water. Carbon-dated artifacts pulled from the site range from 9,000 to even 11,000 years old. If those dates are accurate, this city predates Sumer, Egypt, and the Indus Valley by millennia. And once again, no records remain of its builders. It simply should not exist. Individually, each of these sites could be dismissed. Together, they form a pattern of technological sophistication that appears too early, of massive stones shaped and placed in ways we cannot replicate today, of monuments that have survived thousands of years, not because of simplicity, but because of genius. These are not the works of trial and error. They are not the products of slave labor and crude tools. They are the signatures of a forgotten science, a memory of knowledge preserved in stone because nothing else would survive the next reset. The stones were not only meant to impress, they were meant to endure, to outlast floods, end fire, war, and collapse. They are the black boxes of a civilization that knew it would fall, that understood time not as a line, but as a wheel. The builders did not write manuals, because they knew parchment would burn. They did not record instructions in clay, because they knew clay could crumble. They carved their truths into the hardest rock they could find and aimed them at the stars, hoping that one day, someone, perhaps us, would see them not as curiosities, but as messages. Messages that say, we were here, we were advanced, we were erased, and now the burden of memory passes to us. The anomalies are not anomalies. The impossibilities are not impossible. They are signs of what came before, and perhaps of what comes next. When we think of ancient civilizations, we imagine dusty ruins and windswept deserts. We search for the past in dry places, among bones and broken pottery. But what if the greatest cities of the first world lie not beneath sand, but beneath the sea? What if the oldest stories of humanity, floods, deluges, cities swallowed by the ocean, were not metaphors, but memories? All across the globe, from the coast of India to the shores of Japan, from the Mediterranean to the Pacific, the ocean hides secrets that rewrite everything we thought we knew about history. Beneath the waves lie the ruins of a forgotten world, the cities of the flood. To understand what lies beneath the sea, we must begin with an event so catastrophic, so rapid, that it transformed the face of the earth within a human lifetime. Around 13,000 years ago, as the last ice age ended, the planet experienced a dramatic warming event. Glaciers that had taken tens of thousands of years to form melted in a geological instant. The result was Meltwater Pulse 1A, a global flood that raised sea levels by more than 400 feet. Continental shelves vanished. Islands disappeared. Ancient coastlines were drowned forever, and with them, any civilizations that may have lived there. This is not speculation, it is science. Ice core data from Greenland confirms the temperature spike. Sediment layers across continents show sudden changes in chemical composition. Fossil records indicate mass extinction events and biome collapses. The flood happened. What remains unspoken is what that flood destroyed. If humanity had built cities before this event on the coastlines where food was abundant, travel was easy, and climate was mild, then those cities would now be underwater, forgotten by time, hidden in the depths. And that is exactly where we are finding them. In the early 2000s, during a water pollution survey in the Gulf of Cambay off the coast of India, sonar scans revealed straight lines, geometric patterns, and regular grids beneath more than 100 feet of water. When divers retrieved artifacts, pottery shards, tools, and carvings, carbon dating placed them at over 9,000 years old. This was not a random scattering of stones. It was a city, a real city, with roads and buildings and public spaces, and it was built at a time when no cities were supposed to exist. Off the coast of Japan, near the island of Yonaguni, lies another enigma. Discovered by a diver in the 1980s, the Yonaguni monument appears at first to be a natural rock formation, but upon closer inspection, it reveals massive terraces, carved staircases, smooth surfaces, and right angles that do not occur naturally in such formations. Marine geologist Masaki Kimura spent decades studying the site and concluded it was man-made. Critics argue it must be natural. Why? Because if it is not, then someone built a monument so precise that it has survived 10,000 years beneath the sea, and that someone must have lived before the flood. In the Mediterranean, off the coast of Malta, enormous stone blocks lie beneath the shallow waters, aligned in ways that mirror the megalithic temples still standing on land. These stones suggest that the original temple complex extended far beyond the current coastline before the rising sea forced its builders inland. In Southeast Asia, beneath the waters that now separate Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, sonar mapping has revealed ancient riverbeds, terraces, and settlement grids, evidence that a vast, fertile landmass known as Sunderland once supported thriving human populations before it was swallowed by the ocean. The picture that emerges from these findings is not one of scattered anomalies. It is a global pattern. From Asia to Europe to the Americas, drowned structures appear at the edge of what were once ancient shorelines. These are not isolated accidents of erosion or chance. They are the ruins of a world that lived and died before the current one began. They are the remnants of a civilization erased not by time, but by water, and they match precisely the timelines and locations we would expect if the flood myths of ancient cultures were based on real events. The implications are staggering. If these structures are truly that old, then the history of human civilization must be rewritten, not as a story of slow progress from nomadic hunters to city builders, but as a story of loss and recovery, of a great age destroyed, and a long, dark period in which survivors struggled to rebuild. This view is not just supported by myth, it is supported by science. The same period that produced the global flood also left behind a strange black layer in the sediment, a mix of soot, melted minerals, and microscopic diamonds, indicating a world engulfed in fire and then submerged in water. This layer is found across North America, Europe, and parts of Asia. It coincides with the extinction of dozens of species and the sudden disappearance of large human populations. It is the geological fingerprint of a disaster so vast that only legends could preserve its memory, and those legends, told across every continent, speak of the same thing: a world-ending flood. The Sumerians called it the Flood of Utnapishtim. The Hebrews remembered it as the Flood of Noah. The Hindus told of Manu and the boat. The Greeks spoke of Deucalion. The Maya warned of the end of the fourth sun. Different names, different faces, same event. These stories were not inventions, they were testimonies. The survivors of the flood may not have understood the cosmic mechanics behind the catastrophe, but they knew it had happened. They knew it had destroyed everything, and they wanted us to remember, so they encoded their memories in myth, ritual, and stone. They passed down the knowledge in songs, symbols, and sacred texts, and for thousands of years, we forgot, we mocked their stories, called them primitive, called them superstitious. All the while, the evidence was waiting beneath the sea. It is now becoming harder to ignore, as sonar imaging, underwater archaeology, and satellite analysis grow more sophisticated. The number of submerged sites is increasing. Some are dismissed as coincidences. Others are buried in academic silence. But a few have begun to force open the doors of accepted history. The ocean does not lie. It does not preserve parchment or paint, but it does preserve stone, and the stones beneath the sea tell a story that no textbook dares to admit, that a great civilization once flourished, only to be drowned in a single, brutal instant. If we are willing to listen, if we are willing to look, we may yet recover what they tried to preserve. We may yet understand why so many of their myths begin not with creation, but with destruction. If the megaliths on land stretch the boundaries of belief, then the structures beneath the oceans shatter them entirely. In the cold darkness below, the waves lie ruins that defy all accepted timelines. Ruins that do not belong to any recognized civilization, nor to any known era. These sunken structures are older than Egypt, older than Sumer, older than myth. They belong to a time when the sea was hundreds of feet lower, and when vast stretches of now submerged land teemed with life and perhaps human cities. These cities did not simply erode or crumble, they drowned. They were consumed in a sudden, violent flood, and their memory survives only in the silence of the ocean floor. The most compelling evidence of this ancient cataclysm is not hidden in a dusty archive. It is encoded in the geology of the Earth itself. About 13,000 years ago, the planet underwent a series of rapid and extreme transformations. The end of the last ice age was not a gradual thaw, as once believed. Instead, it was punctuated by a dramatic event known as Meltwater Pulse 1A, during which sea levels rose over 400 feet in less than a millennium, possibly even faster. Entire continental shelves were swallowed, coastlines shifted, inland plains became ocean beds. The change was global, sudden, and irreversibly. This flood coincided with the Younger Dryas, a mysterious climatic period that saw a return to near glacial conditions after the Earth had begun to warm. The Younger Dryas is marked by a sudden plunge in global temperatures, widespread megafauna extinction, and mass human population collapses. What caused this catastrophic reversal? The leading theory is known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a suggestion that fragments of a disintegrating comet struck the Earth, igniting global wildfires, destabilizing ice sheets, and plunging the planet into chaos. The physical evidence for this theory is startling. Across North America, Europe, and parts of Asia, scientists have identified a thin layer of black carbon-rich sediment, known as the black mat. Within this layer are nanodiamonds, high-temperature spherules, and melted minerals, all markers of an extraterrestrial impact. This layer sits precisely at the boundary between two vastly different epochs. Before it, we see signs of human occupation, flourishing ecosystems, and stable climate. After it, we see charred remains, sudden extinction, and, eventually, the rise of the civilizations we recognize today. Whatever happened during that event, it erased a world. If a civilization had existed before this catastrophe, it would not have left scrolls or books. It would not have left villages in the highlands or tools in the mountains. It would have built on the coasts where rivers met seas, where trade and fishing sustained life. And those coasts, during the flood, vanished. Everything on them would now lie buried beneath hundreds of feet of salt water and sediment. The silence of the ocean is not proof of absence. It is the perfect graveyard for a forgotten world. That is why the discoveries off the coasts of India and Japan are so unsettling. In the Gulf of Cambay, sonar imaging revealed vast underwater grids, aligned in straight lines with intersections forming angles too precise to be natural. These are not rock formations. They are streets, foundations, urban planning in the depths. Divers recovered artifacts that, once carbon dated, shocked the archaeological world. Ceramics and tools that predated the known rise of urban civilization by thousands of years. And yet, rather than embrace the implications, the discovery was quietly shelved. Similarly, at Yonaguni in Japan. Massive megalithic terraces rest beneath the sea, carved into step-like layers that resemble ziggurats and amphitheaters. The edges are sharp, the corners right-angled, the surface is smooth, carved channels run through the stone, and curious patterns appear along its walls. Critics call it a fluke of erosion, but natural erosion does not produce symmetry on that scale. It does not carve staircases into the ocean bed, and when dozens of similar submerged structures are found throughout the region, the explanation begins to strain. In Southeast Asia, the submerged landmass of Sundaland tells an even grander story. During the last glacial maximum, this region was not a series of islands, but a vast, fertile plain ideal for human habitation. Today, it lies beneath the sea, but sonar scans and underwater topography have begun to reveal submerged rivers, coastlines, and signs of ancient settlement. If a culture flourished here, it would have vanished in the same catastrophic flooding, and given the scale of Sunderland, it could have supported millions of people. In the Mediterranean, researchers have found rows of submerged stones off Malta aligned with the island's above-water megalithic temples. This suggests that the entire complex extended into areas now underwater, implying a much earlier origin than previously believed. These discoveries hint at a far older, far wider civilization than we have imagined, a civilization that understood astronomy, architecture, and geography, and whose greatest cities now lie silent beneath the waves. The consistency of this story across the globe is what makes it impossible to dismiss. We are not looking at isolated curiosities. We are looking at the shattered skeleton of a world that predates our own. A world that was vibrant and organized enough to leave behind cities, monuments, and mathematical knowledge, but was destroyed so completely that only stone and myth remained. The ocean did not erase it maliciously. It simply obeyed physics. Ice melted, water rose, and everything humanity had built along its shores was lost. What the flood myths around the world preserve is not fantasy. It is the human memory of trauma. It is the echo of watching cities drown, of seeing the horizon swallowed by rising tides, of living through a moment when the world itself seemed to end. These myths, whether in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the tales of Manu, or the legends of Viracocha, do not differ in their structure. They all begin with a world that was a great destruction, a chosen few who survive, and a desperate attempt to begin again. Today, the technology exists to confirm or deny these stories. Sonar, satellite imaging, undersea drones, all tools that can explore the ocean floor in ways never before possible. And as these tools are used, the truth continues to rise like Atlantis from the deep. Each new discovery supports a single, unavoidable conclusion. The flood happened, it was global, and it ended an age that we have forgotten. But the ruins beneath the waves do more than confirm destruction. They whisper a second message, perhaps even more important, that once, long ago, we knew how to build, that we understood the stars, that we mapped the earth and mastered the oceans, and that even as the waters rose, someone, somewhere, tried to save the knowledge. Long before GPS satellites and laser surveys, someone mapped the world with a level of precision that defies every expectation of ancient cartography. These maps, scattered across centuries and cultures, depict continents as they existed not only before modern exploration, but before the end of the last ice age. They reveal coastlines that should have been unknown, sometimes even invisible, beneath thousands of feet of ice. These are not isolated cases of lucky guesses or artistic embellishment. They are records, fragments of a far older source, copied and recopied through generations by hands that did not understand what they were preserving. Together, they form a whisper from the forgotten past. Someone was here before, and they knew the earth. The most famous of these is the Piri Reis map, created in the year 1513 by an Ottoman admiral whose access to ancient knowledge would shock the academic world centuries later. The map accurately depicts the eastern coast of South America, the west coast of Africa, and the northern Atlantic in startling detail. But what truly unsettled historians was a strange coastline at the bottom of the map, a stretch of land that matches, nearly perfectly, the ice-free coast of Antarctica. The problem? Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until the year 1820, and even then, it was covered by a mile of ice. But the coastline Peary Race drew matches what would only later be revealed through seismic surveys and satellite scans what Antarctica looks like underneath the ice. Not as it appears today, but as it existed more than 6,000 years ago, when parts of its landmass were still ice-free. Peary Race himself admitted he didn't create this section from his own observations. In a note on the map, he states clearly that he used older source materials, many inherited from ancient seafarers, passed down through unknown generations. Some were said to date from the time of Alexander the Great. Others were even older. This was not a single anomaly. In 1531, French cartographer Oronteus Phineas produced another map showing Antarctica with rivers, mountain ranges, and interior features that would not be officially confirmed until the 20th century. Like Peary Rees, he claimed to have copied earlier sources. Then came Gerardus Mercator in 1569, whose famous projection is still used today. He too compiled data from texts he described as works of a forgotten people. One of his polar maps includes the Arctic as a series of islands surrounding a central landmass, a depiction echoed in geological reconstructions of the North Pole as it appeared during previous climatic phases. Still more bizarre is the map produced by Philippe Buache in the 18th century. His map of Antarctica splits the continent into two major landmasses, separated by a narrow channel of water. At the time, this was dismissed as fantasy, but in the 1950s, when ice-penetrating radar finally revealed the shape of the land beneath the frozen continent, Buache's map was proven accurate. This landmass division exists. It is real. But how could a cartographer in the 1700s have known this? And how could any ancient source have measured it thousands of years earlier? Modern historians have attempted to explain these anomalies as coincidences, but lucky guesses do not yield accurate longitude. They do not outline submerged coastlines with such fidelity. They do not depict mountains and rivers beneath ice sheets. And they do not emerge again and again in the maps of different cultures separated by time, language, and geography. The only explanation that accounts for this is also the most disturbing. These cartographers were working from materials inherited from a lost civilization, a culture that explored the world when the sea levels were lower, and the continents looked very different. Consider this. During the last ice age, when sea levels were significantly lower, massive stretches of land, now submerged, would have been coastal plains. These areas, rich in resources and favorable in climate, would have supported large human populations. If a maritime culture existed during this time, it would have mapped the coastlines that existed then, not the ones we see today. And when the ice melted, when the oceans rose by 400 feet, those coastlines vanished. But the maps did not. This civilization would have had to understand astronomy, geometry, and timekeeping with extraordinary precision. Longitude, in particular, is notoriously difficult to calculate without accurate time measurement, something not achieved in our own era until the invention of the marine chronometer in the 18th century. And yet, the ancient maps demonstrate correct longitudinal spacing. Whoever created the originals knew how to track the stars, understood the Earth's curvature, and had a system of measurement that allowed them to traverse oceans with confidence. Some scholars suggest that this knowledge may have come from the Library of Alexandria, the legendary repository of ancient wisdom, but this only pushes the question back in time. Even the Alexandria Library, at its height, did not exist before Antarctica was frozen. Its contents must have been inherited, preserved from an even earlier time, a time when the Earth was still recovering from the previous cataclysm. and remnants of a global civilization attempted to salvage their knowledge before the flood took it all. What we see in these maps is not invention, but the echo of a culture that knew the world, that measured it, that tried to pass its knowledge down through time. They knew the ocean would rise. They knew ice would cover lands once fertile. They may have even known that future civilizations would forget. So they preserved their maps, not in fragile paper or fading ink, but in a tradition of copying. Scribes, cartographers, and scholars passed the lines from generation to generation, often without understanding what they were truly preserving. A coastline here, a river there, a shape copied from a parchment that had already yellowed with age. This is how knowledge survives catastrophe, not through permanence, but through repetition. The ancient navigators may not have survived the flood, but their maps did, hidden in the margins of later civilizations, waiting to be noticed. Today, we are beginning to understand what we've inherited. We can match the lines with satellite imagery. We can measure the accuracy. And what we find is shocking. Someone mapped the world before we knew how to walk upright through its history. The maps tell us something more. They suggest that the catastrophe was not unexpected. The careful detail, the precise coordinates, the global scale of mapping all indicate a civilization that saw the end coming and tried to warn us. They did not have satellites. They did not need them. They had time, star charts, and a mastery of long-forgotten sciences. What they lacked was a way to ensure that their story would be believed. Now, centuries later, we are beginning to listen. The ancient maps are not curiosities. They are warnings. They are pieces of a larger puzzle that points toward a forgotten world, a world that knew the flood was coming. Hidden deep within every human being is a record of survival far older than writing, older than temples, older even than spoken myth. It is not written on stone or parchment, but coded into our blood. DNA does not tell stories the way cultures do. It does not embellish or forget. It keeps scars. It records what happened through loss, through contraction, through the narrowing of lineages. And when we study those scars, we find something astonishing. We find proof of catastrophe. We find near extinction. We find moments in human history where only a tiny group of people remained, and everything we are today comes from them. The first of these events took place around 70 to 80,000 years ago. According to geneticists, the entire global population of Homo sapiens may have been reduced to as few as 3,000 individuals. Some estimates place it even lower, around 1,000. Imagine that, all of us, every language, every face, every culture, descended from a population smaller than a small town. What could cause such a collapse? The most likely culprit is the Toba supervolcano, a titanic eruption in what is now Indonesia. It unleashed an ash cloud so vast that it blocked sunlight for years, plunged the Earth into volcanic winter, and disrupted ecosystems on a planetary scale. For decades, the Toba catastrophe was treated as speculative, but genetic evidence made it impossible to ignore. The remarkably low genetic diversity of modern humans, especially when compared to other mammals, points toward a severe bottleneck in our evolutionary past. Two chimpanzees from opposite ends of Africa show more genetic difference than any two humans on Earth. We are, in genetic terms, a species of survivors. We carry the memory of that near erasure inside every cell. But that was not the only bottleneck. A second, the more recent one, appears in our genetic record, this time aligning precisely with the end of the Younger Dryas, about 12,800 years ago. This was the same period during which sea levels rose catastrophically, megafauna went extinct, and ancient coastlines disappeared. It was the time of the global flood, and once again, the genetic evidence suggests that human populations shrank dramatically. It wasn't complete extinction, but it was sharp enough to leave a measurable imprint in mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome lineages. These bottlenecks are not just population dips, they are existential crises. They mean that entire branches of the human family tree were cut off. Cultures, languages, technologies, all lost in a span of years. And the few who survived became the carriers of everything that would come next. These survivors didn't just rebuild civilization, they were civilization, but they emerged into a broken world, forests burned, coastlines drowned, weather chaotic, food scarce. In such conditions, passing down the full complexity of their previous world would have been impossible. What survived were fragments, memories, stories, rituals, symbols, the things that could be preserved through oral tradition, through myth, through initiation, and over generations. Those fragments took on new forms. The precise astronomical knowledge of a pre-flood age became sacred calendars. Advanced geometry became temple blueprints. Scientific truths became myths about gods and golden ages. The trauma of destruction became stories of wrathful deities, cleansing floods, and chosen survivors. This is why flood myths appear in every ancient culture, not because they are literary inventions, but because they reflect real, traumatic, shared memory passed down for over 400 generations. The same structure echoes from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, a great flood, a chosen family or individual, survival through a vessel or mountain, and the birth of a new age. These are not disconnected tales. They are genetic echoes dressed in the clothing of culture. Even more fascinating is how these myths often include descriptions of beings who came after the flood, figures of wisdom, knowledge, and rebuilding. These are the Viracochas, the Oannes, the Quetzalcoatls, the teachers. If the genetic bottleneck wiped out most of the global population, then these beings were likely the few who remembered. The custodians of knowledge, the last to carry the light of a lost age. DNA also reveals something equally profound. During each period after catastrophe, there are signs of rapid adaptation. Human populations change, diversify, and innovate. It's as if, after surviving collapse, something awakens. Technology doesn't evolve slowly, it reappears. Agriculture, monumental architecture, metallurgy all emerge suddenly, in multiple places, as though being remembered rather than invented. This is especially true after the Younger Dryas, when sites like Göbekli Tepe emerge almost instantly with advanced symbolic and architectural design right after the worst climate event in 10,000 years. How does one explain this leap? Mainstream archaeology calls it a coincidence or a mystery, but when viewed through the lens of survival memory, it becomes logical. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were not inventors starting from zero. They were descendants of those who remembered or had been taught by those who did. The precision, the symbolism, the astronomical alignments all suggest continuity, a thread stretching backward through disaster, carrying whispers of a lost world. This theory is reinforced by how ancient civilizations described their own origins. The Egyptians spoke of a time called Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods walked among men and taught them how to measure and build. The Sumerians told of kingship descending from the heavens. The Incas said their ancestors emerged from caves guided by divine teachers. Again and again, we see cultures describing instruction, not evolution. They say their knowledge was given, not invented, and when decoded, these myths point back to the same window of time, the end of the last cataclysm. This is not fantasy, it is memory, and modern science is finally catching up. In recent years, genetic studies have traced all humans back to two common ancestors, one maternal, one paternal, nicknamed mitochondrial Eve, and Y chromosome Adam. These were not the first humans. They were the last universal ancestors of modern lineages. In other words, the survivors, the ones who passed through the bottleneck. So, what does this tell us? It tells us that civilization is fragile, that we have been nearly erased before, that the memories of that erasure linger not just in myth, but in our biology, and that what we call the rise of civilization may, in fact, be its recovery. A recovery led by those who remembered enough to rebuild and by those who encoded their warnings into story and stone. We are their descendants. Their blood flows in us. Their trauma echoes in our DNA. Their stories live in our myths. And perhaps their warnings now stir in our dreams. Because if it happened before, if we nearly vanished, then it can happen again. Every culture on Earth, no matter how isolated or ancient, seems to remember the same story. A time when the world ended not by war, not by disease, but by water, a flood, vast and unrelenting, rose to consume all that once was. In every corner of the globe, we find tales of a great deluge of civilizations drowned, of survivors adrift, and of a world that had to begin again. The consistency of this myth, its recurring structure, and its emotional weight across so many unrelated peoples suggests that it is not fiction. It is memory. It is trauma encoded in culture, passed down across generations as warning and remembrance. In Mesopotamia, the oldest known civilization to leave us writing, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of Utnapishtim, a man warned by the gods to build a great vessel and save himself, his family, and the seeds of life. The gods unleash a storm that lasts 6 days and nights, flooding the world and destroying everything. When the waters recede, the boat rests on a mountain. Utnapishtim releases birds to find land. These details an ark. A flood, a mountaintop, birds would appear again, thousands of years later, in the Hebrew story of Noah, with remarkable fidelity, but the Sumerian version predates the Bible by over 1,000 years. In the Hebrew tradition, the flood is a divine punishment, sent to cleanse a corrupt world. Noah, chosen for his righteousness, is given detailed instructions to build an ark. The waters rise, the earth is submerged, and only those aboard the ark survive. Afterward, a covenant is made, and humanity begins anew. What's striking is not the moral frame, but the mechanical detail, the engineering of the ark, the coordination of animals, the global scale of destruction. This is not a local flood. This is a reset, further east. The Hindu scriptures tell of Manu, the first man and the lawgiver. In the Satapatha Brahmana, he is warned by a fish that a great flood is coming. He builds a boat, ties it to the horn of the fish, who is revealed to be Vishnu in disguise, and rides out the flood. When the waters subside, Manu performs rituals and repopulates the earth. In this tale, as in others, we see divine warning, preparation, a vessel, survival, and rebirth. The structure is the same. The lesson is the same. The world ends, and a new one begins. In Greece, the myth of Deucalion and Pyrrha tells of a great flood sent by Zeus to destroy humanity. Deucalion, warned by his father Prometheus, builds a chest and survives the flood with his wife. They land on a mountain, and afterward, they repopulate the world by casting stones over their shoulders, stones that transform into people. The symbolic language may differ, but the pattern remains. Destruction, survival, rebirth cross the oceans, and the echoes persist. The Aztecs and Maya both speak of previous worlds destroyed by water. The Maya describe the end of the fourth sun in a flood that wiped out humanity. Only 2 people survive, hidden inside a hollow log or cave. The Aztecs tell of Tlaloc, the god of rain, whose tears flooded the world. Again, there are survivors who carry knowledge into the next age. In Andean mythology, the Inca remember a time when a great flood destroyed the world. From the waters emerged Viracocha, a bearded teacher and civilizer who helped the people rebuild. He is not a god of punishment, but of renewal. In the Amazon, indigenous tribes recall waters rising to consume everything, and a great canoe or floating house that preserved life. On Easter Island, flood myths blend with tales of ancestral seafarers who arrived after a great catastrophe. In North America, the Hopi, Zuni, Ojibwe, Cree, and Abenaki all preserve variations of the flood. The Hopi speak of previous worlds, 3 of them each destroyed by fire, ice, or water. We are now in the 4th, and the 5th is still to come. In one tale, people are guided into underground chambers to survive the flood, then re-emerge when the waters recede. The Ojibwe tell of a world submerged, with survivors seeking refuge on the back of a great turtle, hence Turtle Island, the indigenous name for North America. The Haida remember a flood that swallowed the forests and forced their ancestors to higher ground. Even in Australia, where Aboriginal culture has remained remarkably continuous for tens of thousands of years, there are flood stories. These myths describe ancient coastlines, now underwater, and speak of lands swallowed by the sea. Modern bathymetric mapping has confirmed that some of these stories describe real landscapes that were last visible 10,000 years ago. Oral memory has endured where no written record could. In the Pacific, the Samoans, Maori, and Hawaiians preserve similar tales. They speak of a time when the sea rose and covered the land, of heroes who built canoes, of gods who warned the wise and punished the proud. In Africa, the Yoruba, the Zulu, and the Dogon speak of water gods and floods that cleanse the earth. In China, the myth of Yu the Great tells of taming a world drowned in floodwaters. These stories are not vague, they are specific. They include measurements, directions, durations. They describe not rainstorms, but oceans rising, not metaphorical endings, but geological ones. Mainstream historians often explain these myths away by saying, floods are common, so cultures naturally told flood stories. But common floods don't raise sea levels by 400 feet. They don't destroy whole coastlines, drown cities, or force civilizations to begin again. And they don't leave a global imprint across every continent's mythology. The flood myths, viewed as a network, reveal something much deeper than coincidence. They represent a shared human trauma, an event so massive it fractured time into before and after, and they suggest one more thing that people survived. That knowledge was preserved, that a message was encoded in story form, because stories could endure where empires could not. These myths often come with a warning. They do not say the flood happened once. They say it happens again and again. The Maya counted cycles. The Hindus tracked yugas. The Hopi spoke of repeating worlds. The Greeks told of ages of man, each ending in catastrophe. These were not simply tales of morality, they were systems of memory. Systems designed to prepare future generations for the next reset. If we strip away the religious language and symbolic filters, we are left with a core truth. At some point in the distant past, a global cataclysm occurred. It drowned coastlines, scattered survivors, and erased a chapter of human history. And those survivors, whoever they were, wanted us to remember not just the destruction, but the cycle, not just the flood, but the return. The flood myths are not fiction, they are a record, they are a warning, and we are the generation standing closest to the next turning of the wheel. After the floodwaters receded and the shattered remnants of humanity emerged from caves, highlands, and floating sanctuaries, something extraordinary happened. In the earliest traditions of nearly every ancient civilization, we find accounts of mysterious figures who arrived not as conquerors, but as teachers. They came not with swords, but with knowledge. They appeared from the sea, from the sky, from the ashes of the previous world, bearing memory, wisdom, and the tools of civilization. And the survivors, dazed and broken, called them gods. These figures are everywhere. Their names differ, but their role is the same. They restore order. They reteach agriculture, astronomy, writing, mathematics, ethics. They build monuments, establish law, and then vanish, always vanishing. Sometimes they leave by sea, sometimes by sky, sometimes they simply disappear into legend. But they are never born in the new world. They arrive from elsewhere. Their presence is sudden. Their memory endures. In the high Andes of South America, the legends tell of Viracocha, a tall, pale-skinned, bearded figure who emerged from the waters of Lake Titicaca after the Great Flood. He wore unfamiliar robes and carried a staff. He traveled across the land, teaching the people how to farm, how to build, and how to live in harmony. He was said to have brought order to a world of chaos. Once his work was done, he walked to the Pacific Ocean and departed across the sea, promising to return. This promise would echo down the generations and be later manipulated by conquistadors who claimed to be his fulfillment. In Mesoamerica, the Maya and Aztec civilizations told of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. He wills, too, was a civilizer, a bringer of language, knowledge, and astronomy. He opposed human sacrifice. He built cities, introduced calendars, and, like Viracocha, vanished over the ocean, with a prophecy of return. Depictions of him in ancient art show a bearded figure, often in a boat or with serpent iconography representing energy, transformation, or celestial wisdom. The similarities are more than symbolic. They speak to a shared prototype, the teacher who comes after catastrophe. Among the Hopi, stories persist of Kokopelli, a hunchbacked figure with a flute, who traveled from village to village after the world was remade. He taught planting, music, and ritual. Some versions describe him arriving after a flood, carrying seeds and songs that would restore life. The Zuni and other Pueblo cultures preserve similar stories of beings who emerged from underground sanctuaries or sacred mountains to guide humanity back toward balance. In ancient Mesopotamia, a hybrid figure called Oannes emerges from the Persian Gulf, half man, half fish, not in the literal sense, but in symbolic language. He arrives each morning from the sea, teaches the people writing, law, agriculture, and astronomy, and returns to the water at night. The Babylonian priest, Berossus, records these accounts, noting that Oannes came in the aftermath of destruction, bringing with him knowledge from an earlier time. The idea of a teacher from the sea, part of an older, wiser race, was accepted, not questioned. It was fact wrapped in divine form. In Egypt, the story becomes even more precise. The god Osiris, commonly associated with death and resurrection, was originally remembered as a civilizer, a bringer of law, agriculture, and architecture. He was said to have arrived during a time of great confusion and chaos, bringing order and teaching the arts of statecraft. His companion, Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, was credited with inventing writing, astronomy, and mathematics. These were not mythical characters in the modern fantasy sense. They were personifications of ancient teachers, mythologized through retelling over thousands of years. The Dogon people of Mali, West Africa, tell of beings from the Sirius star system who came to Earth after a global catastrophe, teaching metallurgy, astronomy, and societal organization. The Dogon's precise knowledge of Sirius B, a companion star invisible without modern telescopes, has baffled researchers. Where did such astronomical precision come from in a supposedly primitive, isolated culture? Across Polynesia, in the remote islands of the Pacific, legends abound of great canoes arriving after the flood, bearing tall, pale-skinned men with unusual tools. In Hawaii, stories speak of Lono, a god of agriculture and peace, who arrived from the sea and departed the same way. In New Zealand, the Maori recall the arrival of wise navigators who taught star lore and built sacred sites aligned with the heavens. Even in Japan, myths describe the descent of heavenly beings, known as Tensen, who arrived bearing mirrors, swords, and jewels, the three symbols of knowledge, order, and divine authority. These beings established the imperial line and taught the early people the rules of civilization. All over the world, the pattern repeats. A world destroyed, a remnant left in chaos, and the arrival of a teacher or group of teachers from outside the devastation, often from the sea, sometimes from the stars. What do we make of this pattern? Mainstream archaeology dismisses these stories as cultural metaphors, symbols of social order, mythologized rulers, or allegories of change. But the consistency is too exact. The timeline is too tight. The survivors of a global cataclysm remember specific teachers, bearing knowledge their descendants could not have developed on their own. These beings are not described as gods in the omnipotent, all-powerful sense. They are wise, not supernatural. They bleed in some stories. They die or depart. They have knowledge, not magic. Their divinity comes from what they remember, not from what they control. In nearly every myth, they are framed as those who came before the last living echoes of a prior age, carrying the fragments of a fallen world into the hands of people who had lost almost everything. Perhaps they were survivors of the fourth civilization, those who saw the flood coming and preserved what they could plans, principles, star maps, mathematical constants. They could not rebuild the world alone, but they could plant seeds in minds, in myths, in stone, and when those seeds took root, they grew into the civilizations we now call ancient Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, the Olmec, the early Chinese dynasties. These early cultures did not start from scratch. They started from memory, from teachings inherited from a forgotten age. They built cities with sacred geometry. They aligned monuments with solstices and equinoxes. They tracked celestial events with a precision we only recently regained. And they said, with perfect clarity, "We were taught," end quote. What we see in these teacher myths is not fantasy. It is inheritance. It is the record of a transfer, a hand reaching out from the ruins of the old world to guide the first steps of the new. And if these stories are true, then we must ask, what did they know that we have forgotten? And why did they leave their messages not only in myth but in stone? After catastrophe, knowledge does not vanish, it fractures. It recedes from public life, from open conversation, and from the fragile hands of the masses. But in the wake of the flood, a few remembered, a few carried memory not as myth, but as method. They knew that the world had ended before. They knew it would end again. And so, rather than rebuild the past openly, they preserved it in a way that could endure the ignorance of future ages. They hid their knowledge not to conceal it, but to protect it from destruction, from distortion, from time. These were the architects of the mystery schools, the secret traditions, the esoteric lineages that trace their roots not to myth but to memory. In Egypt, the oldest stories speak of Zep Tepi, the first time, an era when gods and men walked together, when knowledge flowed freely, and when the laws of harmony were established. The Egyptians never claimed to have invented their wisdom. They said it was inherited. The priests of Heliopolis, the keepers of solar knowledge, studied stellar precession, sacred geometry, and harmonic resonance. They encoded astronomical cycles in temple design and preserved cosmological truths in symbolic form. To outsiders, these were religious rituals. To initiates, they were time capsules. When the Greeks encountered Egypt, they were awestruck. Thinkers like Pythagoras, Plato, and Herodotus journeyed to the Nile not as tourists, but as seekers. Pythagoras studied there for over 20 years. He returned with mathematical insights, cosmological models, and metaphysical teachings far beyond what Greece had known. Plato spoke of Atlantis, not as a fable, but as recorded memory, a tale given to Solon by Egyptian priests who claimed it was written on ancient stone columns long before Athens was born. But Egypt was not alone in preserving these secrets. In India, the Vedic traditions speak of rishis, seers who received cosmic truths in the aftermath of destruction, the yugas, vast cycles of time, align with the precessional cycle tracked in megalithic calendars. The Upanishads and Puranas describe ages of light and darkness, of knowledge rising and falling. Rituals preserved mathematical constants. Temples encoded the proportions of the cosmos. Every sacred site was a lesson, not merely a place of worship. In the Himalayas, Tibetan monasteries became libraries of ancient memory. Initiates learned through oral transmission, symbolic ritual, and inner transformation. They spoke of cycles, of floods, of hidden knowledge buried beneath ice and time. In Europe, the Druids maintained oral teachings that spanned generations. They refused to write them down, not because they lacked writing, but because they believed that true knowledge must be remembered, not read. Their stone circles like Stonehenge were not primitive calendars, but harmonic machines built with knowledge of resonance, alignment, and time. In the Middle East, a mysterious tradition emerged, Hermeticism, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a fusion of the Greek Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth. This figure, whether mythical or historical, was said to have written the Emerald Tablet, a cryptic work declaring, "As above, so below." Hermetic texts unified science, philosophy, and spirituality, teaching that the universe operates by eternal principles, known before the flood and preserved for those who could understand. These texts influenced alchemists, astronomers, and sages across centuries. Even Isaac Newton studied them. From these traditions came the mystery schools, secret societies built not for power, but for preservation. The Eleusinian mysteries in Greece, the Orphic rites, and the teachings of the Pythagoreans all revolved around initiation, a step-by-step recovery of cosmic memory. These were not religions in the conventional sense. They were frameworks for remembering rituals, symbols, and architecture designed to reactivate knowledge hidden within the human psyche. As empires rose and fell, these lineages were driven underground. The Roman Empire suppressed many of them, but they survived in fragments, in symbols, in secret gatherings. Over time, these fragments coalesced into new forms: the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, the alchemists, and other esoteric orders. Their symbols, compasses, squares, pillars, eyes, are not arbitrary. They are code, geometry as language, architecture as remembrance, ritual as continuity. Take the Freemasons, for example, often misunderstood as a political organization. Their origins lie in stone, not the stone of medieval castles, but the megalithic stones of the ancient world. They studied the sacred geometry encoded in pyramids and temples. The square and compass were tools of moral and cosmic alignment. The great architect of the universe was not a god in the traditional sense. It was the principle of cosmic order, remembered from a time when harmony between heaven and earth was the foundation of civilization. The symbol of the eye, present in Egyptian, Masonic, and American iconography, represents awareness that endures. It is the memory that sees through destruction. The pillar represents stability between cycles. The Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, symbolizes the eternal cycle of destruction and rebirth. These are not random. They are signposts left by those who came before. All of these traditions share a singular purpose: to prepare for the return of the cycle. Not to stop it because it cannot be stopped, but to understand it. To carry forward enough knowledge that, when the world resets again, humanity does not have to start in darkness. The mystery schools did not aim to create elite clubs. They aimed to protect what mattered: geometry, resonance, ethics, cosmology, until it was needed again. And that time, they believed, would come. The builders of the ancient world were not merely engineers. They were timekeepers. They aligned their monuments with solstices, equinoxes, and stellar positions not for superstition, but for tracking the clock of destruction. They understood the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that completes a cycle every 26,000 years. Many believed this cycle marked the rhythm of civilizational rise and fall. The Maya, with their long count calendar, tracked similar cycles. So did the Vedic Yugas, the Egyptian dynastic clocks, and the Platonic year of the Greeks. These are not disconnected systems. They are synced timepieces from a world that once understood the sky not as background but as mechanism. So when we look at the mystery schools, we are not seeing secrets. We are seeing survival tools, maps disguised as myths, calendars hidden in temples, equations embedded in art. The message was always the same. Remember, the cycle returns. Be ready. Today, many of these teachings are dismissed, diluted, or forgotten entirely, but their architecture remains, their symbols endure, and their warning still speaks quietly, waiting for a time when someone will listen not as a skeptic, but as a descendant, because the mystery was never about power, it was about preservation, a lineage of knowledge, passed from the ashes of one world to the builders of the next. Civilizations may fall, but not everything is lost. Sometimes, in caves, in tombs, in forgotten storage rooms of dusty museums, we find traces of technologies that should not exist, objects that defy categorization, that mock the timelines we've been taught to revere. They are outliers, misfits in the archaeological record, often dismissed with a shrug or buried beneath red tape. And yet, when examined closely, they point to something extraordinary. A lost civilization not only preserved fragments of knowledge, but also left behind physical evidence tools, devices, and technologies that survived the flood, the fire, and the forgetting. One of the most provocative examples is the so-called Baghdad Battery, discovered in Iraq in the 1930s. It consists of a clay jar, a copper cylinder, and an iron rod. When filled with an acidic solution, it produces a measurable electrical charge. Conventional archaeologists dismiss it as a storage jar, but laboratory tests confirm that it can function as a primitive galvanic cell, a battery. It predates modern electricity by over 2,000 years. What was it used for? Electroplating? Medical stimulation? No one knows. But its existence proves that someone understood electrochemical principles long before they were invented. It was next to it. Another enigma lies in Dendera, Egypt. On the walls of the Temple of Hathor, there are reliefs showing what appear to be large bulb-shaped objects connected to cables and mounted on pedestals. These have become known as the Dendera lights. To mainstream scholars, they are symbolic, perhaps religious metaphors, but the images are strikingly similar to cathode tubes or arc lamps. More compelling is the fact that some deep Egyptian tombs show no traces of soot or smoke. If torches were used, the walls would bear residue. They do not. What if ancient Egyptians inherited illumination technology from the lost world before them, not fully understood, not replicable but symbolically remembered? Then there is the Antikythera mechanism, found in a Greek shipwreck and dated to around 2,000 years ago. It is a complex gear-driven device with over 30 interlocking bronze components, capable of predicting lunar phases, planetary movements, and eclipses. It even tracked the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games. It uses differential gearing, a technology not seen again until the development of modern mechanical clocks in the Renaissance. It is too advanced to have appeared out of nowhere. It feels like a copy of a copy, descended from an even older device built by a civilization with a deeper understanding of the heavens. In India, we find the Iron Pillar of Delhi, over 20 feet tall and weighing more than 6 tons. It has stood for over 1,500 years without rusting. Modern metallurgists are baffled by its corrosion resistance, which exceeds the capacity of its supposed era. The forging technique suggests a high level of metallurgical sophistication, including an understanding of phosphorus content and atmospheric chemistry. Was this an accident of composition, Or is it a forgotten technique, passed down from a time when iron manipulation was more advanced than we now believe in Peru and Bolivia? At sites like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo, researchers have discovered T-shaped metal clamps embedded in massive stone blocks. These clamps, often made of mysterious copper alloys, were used to bind stones together and were poured into carved channels, requiring a level of casting and temperature control supposedly beyond the capabilities of the Inca or any known pre-Columbian culture. Similar clamps have been found across the ancient world from Egypt to Mesopotamia, suggesting a shared technological tradition, likely inherited from an even older civilization. And then there are the so-called Uparts out-of-place artifacts that defy context entirely. The London hammer, found encased in stone dated to millions of years ago. The Klerksdorp spheres of South Africa, perfectly shaped metallic balls found in Precambrian rock. The Koso artifact, resembling a spark plug, found in a geode. The Nazca lines, best viewed from the sky, etched with mathematical precision. The perfect stone spheres of Costa Rica, carved with geometric uniformity. The list goes on. Each by itself might be dismissed. Together, they paint a portrait of deep anomaly, a hidden thread of knowledge far older than any civilization we currently acknowledge. Why do these objects exist? Some may be the result of hoaxes or misinterpretations, but many have been studied, tested, and verified by credentialed experts only to be dismissed for not fitting the accepted model. If they had emerged in a different context in a lab or a modern dig, they would be celebrated. But because they appear in layers, strata, or ruins that challenge our linear history, they are buried again not by time, but by ideology. What we are seeing is not just technological outliers. We are seeing the material inheritance of a forgotten age, tools and devices that slipped through the cracks of the flood, objects that were preserved in stone or metal, or memory repurposed by later cultures who could not recreate them, only revere them. These are not the best artifacts of the ancient world. They are the survivors. The fourth civilization, the one that perished in the last reset, did not leave us digital libraries or power grids. It left symbols, AT structures, and tools. The survivors of that age likely tried to preserve what they could in physical form, but stone erodes, metal corrodes, stories mutate. What remains today are fragments like the pieces of a puzzle scattered across millennia. A battery here, a mechanism there, a pillar, a clamp, a sphere, each one a whisper from the past, saying, "We knew, we understood, and we tried to save something." Perhaps the most tragic aspect of these artifacts is how they are treated. Instead of sparking global inquiry, they are ridiculed or ignored. Museum drawers overflow with anomalies, unclassified, unattributed, hidden away because no one knows what to do with them. Their presence is an embarrassment to linear history, and yet, for those who are willing to see without the blinders of modern arrogance, they are proof. Proof that our story is not one of endless progress, but of cyclical rise and fall. Proof that we have risen before, that we reached heights, lost them, and are now rediscovering what once was. Modern engineers and scientists have begun to look at these objects with new eyes. What once seemed impossible is now feasible with the help of high-speed machining, 3D modeling, and materials analysis. And as we close the gap between myth and mechanism, between legend and laboratory, we begin to recognize that the ancients may not have been primitive at all. They were advanced in ways we don't yet understand, perhaps not in electricity and combustion engines, but in resonance, material science, energy, and alignment with natural forces. These artifacts are not just relics. They are warnings and instructions. They tell us that civilizations can fall, that technologies can vanish, that memory is fragile, and they challenge us to learn from what remains before we too are swept away. And the survivors of the next world find our tools in the ruins, wondering who we were. Of all the mysteries left behind by the ancient world, none is more confounding than the stones themselves. not just their scale, but the precision, not just their weight, but the way they are shaped, fitted, and placed. The question echoes through time. How did our ancestors move stones weighing hundreds of tons over miles of uneven terrain? How did they carve diorite and granite rocks harder than steel with no iron tools? How did they create seams so tight that not even a razor blade can slip between them? The standard answers ropes, sleds. Copper chisels collapse under scrutiny, and the deeper we look, the clearer it becomes. These builders knew something we do not. They weren't just using brute strength, they were using resonance. Modern science is rediscovering what the ancients may have known intuitively, that everything vibrates. Matter is not static. At the atomic level, particles are in constant motion. Energy flows through vibration, frequency, and resonance. And this principle applies to sound, to light, to gravity itself. What if the builders of the lost world didn't use machines, but used sound? Not metaphorically, literally. What if they understood how to manipulate matter by tuning into its frequency? Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza, whose internal chambers are not only precisely aligned with celestial poles, but also exhibit strange acoustic properties. The King's Chamber, constructed from massive granite blocks hauled from hundreds of miles away, resonates at specific frequencies when sound is introduced. These resonances are not incidental. The chamber acts like a tuning box, amplifying and shaping vibration. The dimensions of the chamber correspond to harmonic ratios. It's not a tomb. It's an instrument. The sarcophagus inside the chamber, often assumed to be a coffin, is too large to have been brought in after the pyramid was built. It had to be placed during construction. It, too, resonates. When struck, it produces a deep, sustained tone. The granite it's carved from contains quartz crystals, which are known to respond to vibration. These are not design choices made for aesthetics. They are functional elements in a structure tuned to the earth. Similar properties are found in the Osirion at Abydos, where enormous granite pillars stand in watery darkness. The structure seems older than the temple above it, as if built during a much earlier phase. Researchers have noted the deep bass frequencies that reverberate through its halls. In Malta, the Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni is a subterranean temple carved from limestone, featuring an oracle chamber that amplifies sound to the point where a whisper can travel through the entire complex. Frequencies around 110 Hz, known to induce altered states of consciousness, are naturally produced in this space. These are not isolated cases. In Peru, the megalithic walls of Sacsayhuaman contain subtle curves and protrusions that seem to respond to vibration. Some blocks produce sound when tapped. In Bolivia, at Puma Punku, the stones are carved with such sharp angles and smooth finishes that modern engineers believe advanced cutting tools were required. But what if the stones weren't cut in the conventional sense? What if they were softened? There are traditions dismissed as myth that speak of stone being softened with sound or chemicals. In Tibet, stories describe monks levitating stones using synchronized chanting, drums, and trumpets arranged in geometric patterns. In the Peruvian Amazon, tales persist of a plant extract used by the ancients to soften rock, allowing it to be molded like clay. While no definitive sample of such a substance has been found, experiments in modern cymatics, the study of visible sound and vibration, demonstrate that sound can shape matter. On a vibrating plate, sand forms complex patterns depending on the frequency applied. At specific frequencies, matter organizes itself into symmetrical structures, circles, hexagons, spirals. These are not random, they are expressions of the underlying vibration. This phenomenon suggests that sound is not just a carrier of information, it is a creative force, and if amplified, focused, or resonated properly, it could influence physical matter. We've seen hints of this in modern laboratories. Acoustic levitation can suspend small objects using sound waves, Sonoluminescence creates flashes of light in liquids using sound. Resonant frequency can shatter glass, collapse bridges, or dislodge kidney stones. The ancients may not have had our technology, but they may have had a deeper understanding of how to harness natural forces through harmonics, geometry, and structure. Even in the 20th century, we find echoes of this lost knowledge. Edward Leedskalnin, a Latvian immigrant in Florida, single-handedly built Coral Castle, moving blocks of coral weighing up to 30 tons without cranes or modern equipment. He claimed to know the secrets of the ancient Egyptians. He worked at night, in secrecy. No one saw how he moved the stones. After his death, strange tools were found, devices involving magnets, pulleys, and acoustic elements. The site remains a modern mystery. Was Leedskalnin rediscovering something ancient? These ancient builders may have used resonant frequency not just for stone shaping, but for transportation. By matching the natural frequency of a stone and introducing external vibration, the effective weight could be reduced, or the structure weakened for shaping. They may have tuned the environment itself using specific materials, geometric proportions, and alignments with Earth's telluric currents and solar harmonics. This is why so many megalithic sites are found on energy grid lines, known as ley lines. It's why they're aligned with solstices, equinoxes, and the precessional cycle. These structures were not merely symbolic, they were functional, part of a lost science that treated space, sound, and vibration as tools for construction and transformation. Imagine a civilization that did not rely on fossil fuels, combustion, or mechanical force. Instead, it used frequency, resonance, and geometry to interact with matter. Such a civilization would leave behind stone structures of impossible precision but few metal machines. Their tools may have been sonic, magnetic, crystalline materials that decay or are misidentified by later archaeologists. And this is what we see: structures built with methods we cannot replicate, using principles we have only just begun to rediscover. These builders did not think like we do. They did not separate science from spirituality, or physics from philosophy. They saw the world as harmonic, and they built accordingly. The science of sound and stone was not fantasy, it was memory, a technology from a forgotten age, encoded in monuments that still hum with the resonance of the past. And if we listen carefully, not just with instruments, but with imagination, we might begin to hear what they once knew. All things move in cycles. The moon waxes and wanes, the seasons turn, the tides rise and fall, and so, too, do civilizations. This was the ancient worldview, not a line of constant progress, but a wheel of creation, destruction, and rebirth. It was not a poetic idea. It was astronomical. It was mathematical. It was a survival strategy passed down by those who had lived through the worst. They knew what modern science is only now beginning to rediscover, that the Earth moves not just in space, but through dangerous patterns in time, that our planet, our sun, and our magnetic field operate like a cosmic clock, and that every 12,000 years it strikes midnight. This 12,000-year cycle is not myth. It's imprinted in ice cores, sediment layers, magnetic reversals, and the disappearance of ancient species and cultures. It's been called many names: the cataclysm cycle, the precessional return, or the solar disaster timeline. But the pattern remains: approximately every 12,000 years, something resets the Earth. Not slowly, not gradually, but in a sudden, chaotic, and catastrophic wave. To see the mechanism, we must begin with the heavens. The Earth, as it spins on its axis, wobbles like a slowing top. This wobble is known as the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle that takes roughly 26,000 years to complete. As the axis shifts, the stars we align with slowly change. To ancient astronomers, this wasn't just a curiosity, it was a calendar. They tracked the stars not only to mark time, but to anticipate danger. The Maya, for example, encoded the precession into their long count calendar. They didn't simply count days, they tracked epochs. The Egyptians oriented their temples to stars that would rise or fall on the horizon at key moments in the precessional cycle. The Hindus described great ages called yugas, rising and falling like tides over cosmic time. Plato called it the Great Year, a cycle of golden ages followed by collapse. Why did these cultures, scattered across the globe, obsess over precession? Because they believed, perhaps correctly, that it told time for the planet itself, that certain positions in the cycle aligned with planetary instability, magnetic upheaval, and even solar fury. They weren't watching the stars out of superstition. They were tracking a countdown. One of the most devastating events in Earth's recent history occurred around 12,800 years ago, during the transition into the Younger Dryas. It was an abrupt climate reversal. Temperatures plunged. Megafauna went extinct. Human populations vanished. Sea levels surged. The black mat layer found across North America, Europe, and parts of Asia contains charred remains. Nanodiamonds and high-temperature spherules, evidence of impact or atmospheric fire. Scientists now believe this event was triggered by fragments of a disintegrating comet, possibly from the torrid meteor stream striking the Earth. The result? Instant climate chaos. Ice sheets melted. Oceans flooded coastlines. Wildfires burned millions of acres. And humanity, already scarred from earlier bottlenecks, was nearly erased again. But this was not a random event. It fits perfectly within the 12,000-year pulse. The Younger Dryas is just the most recent. Before that, similar upheavals occurred around 24,000 years ago, 36,000, and so on, each marked by magnetic excursions, extinction events, and sudden drops or surges in global temperatures. These are not gradual changes. They are spikes, shocks, resets. The evidence for periodic global cataclysm has expanded beyond climatology. Magnetic field data shows that Earth's geomagnetic pole does not remain fixed. It drifts sometimes slowly, sometimes rapidly. Right now, the North Magnetic Pole is moving at an accelerating pace from Canada towards Siberia. More concerning is that the overall strength of Earth's magnetic field is weakening, having declined more than 10% in the last century. This weakening could precede a geomagnetic reversal or excursion events known from geological history to coincide with mass extinction and environmental chaos. During such a shift, the field becomes disordered, allowing more cosmic and solar radiation to reach the surface. This increase in radiation could destabilize climate systems, disrupt biology, and trigger geophysical change. Then there's the sun, the great driver of all life, and, potentially, all destruction. The sun does not burn steadily. It moves in cycles, 11-year sunspot patterns, longer-term solar minima and maxima, and according to some researchers, cataclysmic outbursts every 12,000 years. The theory of the solar micronova suggests that the sun periodically releases a burst of high-energy plasma, strong enough to scorch the atmosphere, ignite global wildfires, and trigger climate shifts. Is it coincidence that ancient myths across the world describe fire from the sky, the sun changing direction, or a day when the sun stood still? In Zoroastrian texts, the end of each age is marked by cleansing fire. In the Maya codices, solar serpents descend upon the earth. Egyptian inscriptions speak of the sun rising from a different horizon, a poetic way of describing pole shift. The Vedic scriptures detail Pralaya's cosmic dissolutions alternating between destruction by fire and water. The Hopi warned of the blue star Kachina, a celestial harbinger of the end. Different tongues, same alarm. These weren't hallucinations, they were warnings. Fragments of a time when the last cycle ended and the world was nearly lost. And now, the same signs are beginning to appear again. Solar activity is growing erratic. The magnetic field is weakening. Climate extremes are escalating. Ice is melting faster than models predicted. Sea levels are rising. Volcanoes in the Pacific Ring of Fire are awakening. Earthquakes are increasing in magnitude and frequency. And while scientists try to explain each in isolation, they may be missing the larger pattern. These are not isolated anomalies. They are converging indicators of a system under stress, a planet approaching the edge of its own cycle. In the past, each time the cycle turned, civilization fell. Atlantis, Mu, the lost world of the Indus, the vanished builders of Göbekli Tepe, whoever they were, they did not survive with their cities intact. They survived with stories, with memory, with symbols etched into stone. This is why so many ancient monuments are aligned to the stars, not for myth. For measurement, the Sphinx, aligned to Leo, watches the rising of constellations over thousands of years. Stonehenge, Nabta Playa, Chichen Itza, all celestial markers, all star clocks. They were built not to glorify the past, but to prepare for the future, to warn that time is not infinite, that cycles return. And we modern, arrogant, blinded by progress, stand once again at the edge. The 12,000th year approaches. The signs repeat. And this time, we have satellites, telescopes, and deep ice cores to confirm what the ancients already knew. The clock is real, and it is ticking. When civilizations fall, they do not vanish completely. What survives is not the full grandeur of their cities or the perfection of their machines, but their fragments, their symbols, their math, their myths. These fragments drift like wreckage across generations, embedded in the architecture, the rituals, and the stories of those who came after. And when we study the oldest civilizations of our current age, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, we see something astonishing. They did not begin at zero. They began with structure, order, and astronomical knowledge that should have taken millennia to develop. It's as if they were not starting from scratch, but picking up where someone else left off. This is the foundation of the forgotten legacy we've inherited. Civilization reborn from memory, not invention. The Sumerians did not stumble toward cuneiform. They began with a fully developed writing system, complete with administrative complexity, cosmology, and law. Egypt's first pyramids were not experimental. The oldest, the Great Pyramid of Giza, remains the most precise. Its alignment with true north is more accurate than modern buildings. Its proportions encode pi, phi, and the dimensions of the earth itself. These are not the hallmarks of a society just learning how to build. They are the fingerprints of recovered genius. We have long assumed that history is a straight line, moving upward with each discovery, but the evidence from archaeology tells a different story. A punctuated rise where knowledge appears suddenly, flourishes, then vanishes, only to re-emerge centuries later in a different form. The pattern is clearest in the ancient sciences. Mathematics, astronomy, and architecture show signs of non-linear inheritance. Sophisticated systems are found early, then degrade. Later civilizations attempt to imitate or interpret what came before, often misunderstanding the purpose or origin of the knowledge they inherited. Consider the megalithic builders. From Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge, we find enormous structures aligned with celestial events. The builders knew the solstices, equinoxes, and lunar cycles. They understood precession. How? Göbekli Tepe predates the invention of the wheel, yet features aligned enclosures, T-shaped pillars, and sophisticated symbolic carvings. Mainstream archaeology calls it the product of hunter-gatherers. But what hunter-gatherers build 12,000-ton temples aligned to the stars, then bury them intentionally? It's more likely that Göbekli Tepe was a preservation project built by survivors of the last cataclysm, using memory, not trial and error. And when they finished, they covered it with earth to protect it. They knew another catastrophe could come. They encoded their sky maps and myths into stone and buried them for us to rediscover. This pattern continues across the globe. The Indus Valley civilization emerges fully formed with advanced sewage systems, grid-planned cities, standardized weights, and writing. Then it vanishes. The Olmecs appear with colossal heads carved from basalt, perfect knowledge of magnetism, and star-aligned temples, but no clear developmental lineage. The early Chinese cultures build pyramids and chart celestial events with accuracy rivaling modern observatories. Again and again, we find sudden complexity, not slow emergence. These cultures did not evolve in isolation. They were born from a prior age. And what did they leave us? More than we realize. We inherited mathematics, hidden in the proportions of temples. We inherited astronomy, disguised in myths about gods and constellations. We inherited geometry, carved into stones and passed down through initiation schools. We inherited navigation techniques, embedded in oral tradition. We inherited philosophy, coded in parables about cosmic order and divine justice. But above all, we inherited the idea of time as cyclical, a warning that civilizations rise and fall, not by chance, but by pattern. The ancients did not see time as a line. They saw it as a spiral or a wheel. They spoke of yugas, world ages, suns, and great years. They counted forward not just in years, but in epochs. The Hindus recorded 4 yugas, each declining in virtue, ending in destruction, then beginning again. The Maya spoke of 5 suns, each representing a world destroyed by fire, flood, wind, or earth. The Greeks described ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, each successively more corrupt, leading to collapse. We ignored these cycles. Modern civilization convinced itself that history was different this time, that we had escaped the pattern. That technology insulated us from the forces that brought down every age before us. But that illusion is starting to crack. Climate systems are destabilizing. Magnetic poles are shifting. Solar activity is intensifying. Earth's crust groans beneath rising pressure. And the data from geology and astronomy is beginning to echo what the myths have whispered for centuries. The cycle is turning again. We are now, whether we know it or not, living at the end of an age. The signs are not merely mythological, they are measurable. The ancients left clues in stone, not to glorify themselves, but to warn us. They encoded astronomical alignments in temples and pyramids. They placed structures on ley lines. They tracked the stars not for poetry, but for calendrical precision. And yet, we've lost the original context. We ritualized what was once rational. We turned scientific knowledge into sacred myth, misunderstanding the purpose, but preserving the form. A chant that once described a resonance frequency became a prayer. A symbol representing a processional number became a deity. A temple built to measure the solstice became a shrine. In our forgetting, we enshrined memory in form, but not in meaning. That is the tragedy of collapse. Knowledge becomes fossilized. Its essence survives, but its application is lost. The mathematical harmony once used to build the Great Pyramid is now admired but not replicated. The star law once used to track cataclysm is dismissed as astrological superstition. The myths once used to encode geologic truth are retold as bedtime stories. But perhaps that's how it had to happen. Perhaps the only way knowledge could survive a world-ending flood, a planetary firestorm, or a magnetic reversal was through symbols, myths, and monuments. Perhaps the survivors understood that writing fades, devices rust, and data corrupts, but stories endure, stone endures, geometry endures. And now, as the wheel turns again, it is our task to decode what they left behind. Because we have inherited more than fragments, we have inherited a responsibility to remember, to prepare, and to carry forward what they preserved. If we fail, the next civilization will start over again, just as we did. But if we listen, truly listen to the warnings carved in stone, the alignments in the sky, and the echoes in our myths, we might yet preserve the light that survived the last reset. The question is no longer whether we inherited knowledge from a lost world. We did. The question is, what will we do with it before the cycle resets again? We are the seventh. This truth, once buried beneath myth, now emerges through data. Stone and scar. 6 times before, civilization rose and fell. 6 times, knowledge bloomed only to be burned, drowned, or lost. Each collapse was marked not by failure, but by timing. The forces that undid those worlds were not political or moral. They were cosmic, magnetic, and solar. And now, the seventh stands where all others once stood on the threshold. We are not immune. We are not exceptional. We are simply next. Unlike the civilizations before us, we possess a strange advantage. We are surrounded by warnings, not only in story and stone, but in our own instruments. We can watch the Earth's magnetic field weaken in real time. We can measure the drift of the poles. We can monitor solar activity. See the patterns of instability that terrified the ancients. The signs are not distant. They are here, and they are converging. The magnetic field, our planet's protective shield against cosmic radiation, is deteriorating rapidly. It is weaker now than it was a century ago. The South Atlantic anomaly grows wider, exposing satellites and electronics to increased radiation. The North Magnetic Pole, once stable, is racing across the Arctic. Geologists know what this means. Every time in Earth's past that the magnetic field weakened like this, it preceded a geomagnetic excursion or reversal events that coincided with mass extinctions, sudden climate shifts, and immense volcanic activity. At the same time, the sun grows restless. Solar flares and coronal mass ejections are increasing. A powerful enough burst could disable satellites, wipe digital data, and collapse global infrastructure. But some researchers believe the danger goes beyond communication outages. The micronova hypothesis suggests that every 12,000 years, the sun releases a catastrophic pulse of energy, an outburst capable of igniting the atmosphere, melting ice sheets, and initiating seismic upheaval on a planetary scale. If this sounds like science fiction, consider this. Ancient cultures all over the world described the sun changing. The Zoroastrians spoke of a cleansing flame that purifies the earth. The Maya recorded celestial serpents that descend during the end of ages. The Egyptians described periods when the sun rose from the wrong horizon. The Hopi warned of fire from above and earth shaking from within. These are not coincidences. They are memories of previous solar events, preserved in language, ritual, and symbol. Now combine this with what we see on the ground. Climate instability is accelerating. Ice sheets are collapsing. Oceans are rising. Wildfires consume entire continents. Earthquakes rumble through previously quiet zones. Volcanoes long dormant stir awake. These are not isolated events. They are signals. The planet is entering a phase of systemic stress, just as it did 12,800 years ago. Just as it did before every prior reset. But there is something different this time. Unlike the civilizations before us, we have the ability to measure, to observe, to predict. We have satellites in orbit, deep-sea probes, ice core records, magnetic monitoring stations. The evidence isn't hidden in myth alone, it is confirmed by modern science. And yet, most of our world sleeps. Our technology gives us reach, but not wisdom. Our machines are fast, but our memory is short. We live in the illusion that progress is permanent, that complexity is safety. But the truth is that complexity breeds fragility. Our food systems, power grids, and digital networks are all built on assumptions of stability, and stability is exactly what the cycle does not promise. So the question is not if the cycle will return. It always does. The question is when, and how prepared we are to face it. We cannot stop a solar outburst, We cannot prevent a magnetic reversal or a global flood, but we can choose what we protect. We can choose what we remember. That was the true legacy of the sixth civilization, and the fifth, and all the ones before. They tried to preserve knowledge through structures, through stars, through story. They left behind the Great Pyramid, aligned to true north and encoding the dimensions of the planet. They built Göbekli Tepe, buried beneath layers of time, carrying the memory of a world destroyed. They etched maps onto stone. They passed myths across tongues and continents. And they did all of this, not for glory, but for us. Now it is our turn. We are the inheritors of this ancient chain. We are the link between the last world and the next. And what we do now, what we choose to save, will define what rises after the seventh civilization falls. Will the next age begin in darkness, as a scattered few scavenge for scraps? Or will it begin with light restored wisdom, protected archives, and a clear understanding of the cycles that govern Earth? This is not prophecy. It is pattern. It is a pattern supported by data, by myth, by monument. It does not predict a single date, a single hour. It tells us that time is not endless, that peaks are followed by valleys, that great heights are always shadowed by great collapse. But the pattern also tells us that after the fall comes the rise, that the wheel turns not just to destroy, but to renew. We are not alone. Every myth, every monument, every initiation tradition whispers the same truth. Someone was here before you. They walked this path. They faced this storm. And they left you everything they could. Now, it is our responsibility to continue their work, to decode the messages, to preserve the essential, to rebuild not just our cities, but our memory. That is what it means to be the seventh, not to cling to illusions of permanence, but to stand with clear eyes at the edge of the abyss and choose to carry truth across the threshold. Because after the flood, there will be another dawn. After the fire, there will be another spring. And in that next world, our monuments, our myths, our warnings will be their foundation. Let them say that we remembered. Let them say that we understood. We are the seventh civilization, and the cycle is returning.